Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Real Packers Talk, the podcast dedicated to everything green and gold. I am your host, Ethan Peltier, and I'm very happy to announce that we have finally made it to Week 1 of the 2022 NFL regular season. Today's episode is going to be a preview of the Packers' Week 1 matchup with the Minnesota Vikings. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give some brief notes that came out from practice this week, look at some of the keys to the game, move on to some predictions that I have, and then kind of wrap it up with a final score prediction. Before I talk about the game itself, I do want to talk about some changes that have happened this offseason, specifically for the Minnesota Vikings. They decided to essentially clean house, get a new GM and a new head coach. So they went ahead and hired Kevin O'Connell, who, from what I know about him, he is a much more offensive-minded coach compared to Mike Zimmer, who was much more defensive-minded. So this kind of marks the start of a new era, so to speak, in Minnesota. So it will be interesting to see how they can come in and take what I already thought was a pretty stacked roster. I personally do think that the Vikings are better than most people give them credit for, and that they potentially can be a threat to the Packers as far as the NFC North is concerned this year. To add on top of that, the Vikings have a pretty decent home field advantage at US Bank Stadium. This is a divisional game. Expect to be packed with Vikings fans. This is not going to be a very friendly environment for the Packers this weekend. And I want to take a moment to look at the injury report. On the Packers' final injury report for this week, they listed both David Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins as questionable. So right now, it's kind of up in the air as to whether or not those guys are going to play. Ideally, you would hope that at least one of those guys can be ready to go for Week 1, but we can't really bank on anything. The reason I say that is because the Packers are going up against a pretty stacked defensive line. They already had Danielle Hunter, and then the Vikings went out and acquired Za'Darius Smith. Now, a little side note, there has been a little bit of beef, so to speak. Za'Darius Smith says that the Packers didn't necessarily treat him right when he was cut, didn't feel he was appreciated the way that he should have been, and he stated in an interview that he came to Minnesota with the intention of playing the Packers twice a year. So, it is what it is, I guess. Allen Lazard was also listed as doubtful, meaning that we probably won't see him Week 1. That means that Sammy Watkins and these young receivers are going to have to step up in a major way, and they're going to kind of be thrown into the fire, so to speak. So it will be interesting to see how the offense operates now that, we don't have Devontae Adams, obviously, but now we don't even have, technically, wide receiver 1 in Allen Lazard. So hopefully Lazard can get healthy soon. I'm guessing that they just wanted to play it safe and keep him out at least one more week, and we should expect to see him either next week or the week after that. Going into Week 1, the Vikings injury report was a very short list. They currently have Jonathan Bullard and Lewis Sine listed as questionable going into this matchup with the Packers. And to kind of wrap up the news that came out from practice this week, both Juwann Winfree and Micah Abernathy have been promoted to the active roster for this game. I will remind y'all of the point that I made in last episode that the roster is going to be subject to change, and we should expect to see guys going up and down throughout the year. This is just typical now. So it will be interesting to see Juwann Winfree play. He has had actually a decent amount of regular season experience, which is not something that a ton of the other receivers on the roster right now have. But yeah, now I do want to take a look at the game itself. And right now I just want to hop into, personally, what I believe are the two most important keys to the game. I have one for offense and one for defense. For the offense, first key is run the ball. Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon need to be able to get going early and often. I expect both of them to have a big game. Now that Devontae Adams is no longer on the Packers, I expect us to lean into the run game much more often. And personally, I believe that's what will eventually open up the passing game. If you can establish an efficient and effective running game early on, later in a game, you can use play action and kind of get defenses guessing. So I do expect a big game from the running backs tomorrow. And then for the defensive side of the ball, it is limit Dalvin Cook's production. I think ideally you want to limit him to under 100 yards. He is going to get his carries and he is going to, make his plays. But if you can limit the breakout runs, you're going to be doing yourselves a huge favor. Because kind of like the opposite of the point I just made, where if you can establish the run for your offense, that's great. You also, control the game clock. So definitely you do not want to let the other team control that. The Vikings are obviously loaded with weapons. They've got Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook. Honestly, Kirk Cousins gets a little bit less credit than I think he deserves, but he's no superstar. But they're all dangerous players, and they are capable of moving the ball and scoring points. It is not going to be a cakewalk by any means. Besides the keys to the game, some other things that I'm going to be looking at or paying attention to is the Packers did not play many of their starters in the preseason. Last year, week 1, the Packers had a bit of a meltdown against New Orleans. Now, that game was kind of a fluky game, if you ask me, but a lot of people pointed to the fact that the Packers did not play their starters in the preseason, and as a result, they were under-conditioned or a little rusty or, whatever it is. Hopefully, we do not see that repeat itself tomorrow. We don't see, like, a meltdown or anything. I expect to see the starters come out firing on all cylinders, ready to go. I've obviously mentioned Davante Adams several times in this episode already, but another thing that I want to pay close attention is how will the offense operate now that they do not have their superstar wide receiver. Personally, I expect them to, like I said, run the ball more, but as far as passing the ball, I expect them to spread it out more. Look to see Robert Tonyan, Amari Rodgers, Randall Cobb. Expect to see those type of guys get more involvement in the scheming. So there's that to look forward to as well. I also do think that this is going to be a close game. As I mentioned earlier, this is not a very friendly environment to be going into week 1. It's a divisional matchup. It's going to be tough. So I expect a close and competitive game. And honestly, for that reason, I've had a really, really hard time coming up with a final score prediction. But I have, taken some time to think about it. And before I give my final score prediction, I feel like I should justify it, or at least give my line of thinking. So here it is. I do think that the Vikings are a much better team than they were last year. Their defense was already kind of dangerous, and they've completely revamped their offense. For the Packers, we have no idea what this offense is going to look like. Davante Adams isn't here anymore. So it could be really efficient where they spread it out a lot and run the ball effectively, but it might not. That being said, whenever Aaron Rodgers is your quarterback, I feel like you can go out and put 20, 30 points up consistently. And then on top of that, I know I'm a biased Packers fan here, but I think the Packers have a top 5 defense this year. I mean, if you think about it, they were playing without Jair Alexander for most of last year, and they still had a really good secondary. Jair's back, and he's arguably their best defensive player. On top of that, you've got Rashawn Gary, who I think could be a dark horse defensive player of the year candidate. And you've got Devondre Campbell, who just came off of an all-pro year. Packers just spent 2 draft picks in the first round on defensive players in Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt. This defense could be really, really good, and it's really exciting to think about. Now, I don't want to jump the gun, obviously. But again, there's a lot of thoughts going on right now, which is why I've had, like I said before, hard time coming up with a final score prediction. I could see it being an absolute shootout. I could also see it being a close defensive matchup. But what I ended up deciding to go for, or I guess deciding to roll with as my final prediction, was 21-24, Packers on top. Yeah, I'm biased. I'm going to pick the Packers to win in week 1. I think we have a good chance of winning. This is going to be a close game, and it could honestly swing either way, in my opinion. but I think the Packers are the better team, and I think they're going to go into US Bank Stadium tomorrow, and I think they're going to prove that. But that's about everything that I had as far as this little Week 1 preview goes. I will put out another episode sometime after the game, probably not the same day of the game, probably the Monday following, just because I've got a lot going on and I want to make sure that I balance my work schedule. But with that, I do want to thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to my podcast. It truly means a lot to me. You can find this podcast anywhere on Spotify, Anchor, YouTube, and SoundCloud. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'm going to leave y'all with a Go Pack Go. Peace.